review this game. So the game started with Caro-kann defense, bishop f5 and knight f3, e6, bishop e2. This is also one of the book moves, so sometimes white also offer a bishop exchange, but in this case white played bishop e2, develop bishop and later castle probably, and knight d7. So I think we can push the pawn c5, and then let's see what will white respond to this move, and maybe we can move knight to c6 after push the pawn to c5. So yeah, so I will push the pawn to c5. Why not attack the center? So knight d7 and castle, knight d7 and h3. So this is an interesting move. I think white is planning to move the pawn to g4 if it has to kick the light square bishop. And I have to mention that in this, let's look at the pawn structure. So black has a very solid triangular pawn structure with pawn at d5 at the top, and it's very solid. So for white, the center is very closed, and white has these two pawns. So if we divide the board in two halves, you can see white has a lot more space than black at the king side, actually because of the e5 pawn. So if you have a larger space, so usually it's easier for you to maneuver pieces at this side. So from the long run, we see a lot of cases in advanced variation of Caro-kann, also in French defense. White will attack the king side of black. And on the other hand, since black has like less space than white at the king side, it's a different color, it's very hard for black to maneuver pieces. So usually black will attack on the queen side, like pushing the pawns. So that's why I suggest like move c5 as early as we can. So why I'm explaining this is because when we look at the next move, knight g6, this is not what I really recommend. First of all, if we look at the long run, so if we agree black will attack the queen side, I will move the knight to the queen side instead of the king side. So I will push the pawn to c5, and later move the knight to c6. So we have two knights attacking at the center. So the knight at c6 can attack two center pawns. That's very efficient. And also we maneuver the knight to the queen side, where we attack our opponent. So that's a very important idea to think from a long-term perspective. And also another thing is knight g6 is also blocking our bishop. If white push a pawn to g4, we don't have very good square to place the bishop. Maybe deep inside at e4, but it's very easy to be traded, and later we'll have a bad pawn structure with d5 pawn to e4. And yeah, knight to g6, basically we cannot attack anything if we look at the squares around. So knight g6, rook e1. So yeah, attack this. Control e file, but since the e file is close, I don't think rook e1 is the best move. So thinking what I said, so it's usually white will choose the king side attack. So maybe we can thinking about how can we push the f pawn and g4 and f5. This is where we can create a pawn break. So I will probably move knight to e1 and later f4, f5 and f5. So there will be a big trouble for black. I think black will move the knight back to e7 again. Otherwise, how can we deal with the bishop? So rook e1 and c5. We start to challenge the center. And bishop e3. Yeah, it's good to develop pieces. And also support d4. And another thing we could consider that is c4. Open the center. Because black is slow in castling, so if the center is open, let's say if we remove all the 4 pawns, potentially white can attack the black king because black is slow in piece development. So when your opponent is slow at the beginning, at opening, it's usually better to open up the center or open up files. So bishop e3 and rook ca, control the semi-open file. Potentially we can aim at the c2, c3. That's why white pushed the pawn. Okay, c4. Well, I would say these two moves, rook ca and c4, are not consistent because we move the rook to c file. We want the file to be open, right? Otherwise, why do we move the rook to c file? And if we want to open the file, I don't see the purpose with c4 closest to file. So these two moves are not consistent. So what I will do is keep the pawn exchange or keep the tension at the center, because I don't think black is fully ready to open up the file, but we can always keep the exchange, leave it as it is when we are ready. So for example, if we can develop further, for example, if we can develop another rook to c file, or if we can move the queen to c file, then we open up. So we can utilize the open file as much as we can. And please be aware that, look at the pawn structure. Black have these three pawns. At queen side, white have these three pawns. So if we compare the space, so black has much more space than white at the queen side because of the c pawns. So that means if we want to be ready before we open the file, it's more easier for us to maneuver pieces. But we can move the rook to c6, queen to c7, and then open up c file. And look at the white side. So white can only move the rook or the queen to c1, and maybe another piece at c2, and not to say there's a bishop aiming at c2. So it's actually more difficult for white to control c file than us. So we can leave it as it is and open the file when we are ready. So that's the point. So after c4, I don't think black has good opportunity to further attack the queen side, or at least the whole process will be slowed down. And white can take this opportunity to attack the king side. So b3, white is going to challenge the queen side, but I don't think our focus for white should be at the queen side. Let's just attack the bishop and knight to d2, offer bishop trade. If we trade the pieces, the black center pawns will be destroyed, and this e4 pawn will be a weakness, a hanging pawn. And also, I will move the rook back to f1 and later move the knight. I will push the pawn, attack the black king. So yeah, I think both sides need to be aware or to be careful, thinking about like which side of the board should we focus on. Okay, so b3 and black exchange the knight. Well, so I mean, I understand the purpose of trading knight, because under the fear of g4 we don't have any good place to move the bishop because it's blocked here. But if we only look at these two pieces, I would not rather trade the bishop with the knight, because first of all, my bishop is really controlling more squares than the knight, and I already moved the bishop in one step, and it took me 2 steps to trade a bishop with the knight sitting at a starting position. It's a little bit wasteful, but I can see the point, because the c3 pawn is weakness. So maybe after trading the knight, this trade can make the c3 even weaker. But I mean, at this point, opening up the file is not a good choice, because we also open up the b file if we take the pawn. So the c3 pawn is a weakness, I agree, but the b7 pawn, we still need to defend that. So trading the knight, this is not something I would consider, or maybe you can do that later. We don't have to rush that, right? So maybe after white play g4 and then we trade the knight. Yeah, why not? So trade the knight with a bit with the knight, b5, a4, a6. So white play b4, and so white to want to close the queen side. I think that's okay to close in time because, as I said, the focus of white should be at the king side. But I mean, if you look at the position, if we just imagine we trade all the pieces, so it's actually hard to tell which side is quicker to control the files. So right now, clearly white has two pieces aiming at the queen side, but the c4 pawn is advanced. So this bishops cannot involve in the attack on the queen side, and black could fight back with the rook, and or maybe the queen to b6. And the problem for black is it hasn't castled, so it will take some time for the h8 rook to evolve to the queen side. So maybe white can take this opportunity to move this rook quickly to attack on the queen side. So my point is, at this stage, I think open up the queen side for white, it's also doable. It's something we also can consider. But closing the queen side, I don't see any problem with that either. e7, a5. Or maybe we don't have to close off right now. We can leave this like pawn tension as it is. So if we want to close that, we can close that. But if we want to keep it open, we can leave the pawn at a4. The point is, I don't think black will take my pawn because after the exchange, a6 pawn is weakness. So white is the one who can control opening or closing the a file. So we don't have to rush trading the pawns or closing it. Okay, so the queen side is entirely closed. And let's switch our focus on king side. Rook e8. Yeah, I mean, if we want to attack the king side, maybe push the f pawn is a good choice. Even though we will have e6 backward pawn, but I mean, rook e8, the rook is, if we only look at the rook, it's not very helpful. There is a pawn in front of it. Yeah, it's quite limited in maneuvering. Or maybe black wants to move the knight, or move the bishop to f8. And now you can feel, because of the very small space of the king side, it's very hard for black to maneuver pieces. This is what I said. The pawn structure determines it's very hard for black to maneuver pieces at king side, which means if black wants to attack on the king side, it's super hard. So white start to move the knight, that's good because we want to push the f pawn. Good, that's a very good move. Bishop h4, this attack, I don't think this attack is meaningful because the rook at e1 is not a good square. As I said, the e5 square is stock, so the potential pawn break will be happening at the f file. So this move actually help white to move the rook to a better place. But I also agree that black doesn't have much more choices. Maybe knight h4 is better because we can move the knight to f5. At least this is square we can control. But after g4, yeah, it's really hard to move the knight to f5. Okay, so bishop h4 and 97. We want to move knight to f5 and g4. Yeah, that's another good move. And g6. Okay, so black want to stop f5, I suppose. But usually, if you want to stop a pawn break, I mean, placing another pawn at this g6 is not a good idea because it just makes the pawn break easier because after g6, I mean, after f5, white have a lot more space or squares or diagonals to be opened. Even though you could win the pawn, let's say, even though you win the pawn, like, I mean, you win the pawn, but I mean, in this case, black's better, but because white is not fully ready. But if white is ready, so for example, if we look at g2, so even though white sacrifices a pawn, but I think the composition is also noticeable. because as I said, white has a lot more space and open diagonals to utilize than black. So even though losing a pawn, so because of g6, we open up the g file. I mean, at this stage, I cannot say which side is better, but if white move the rook to g2 and this bishop here, so I think even though losing a g pawn still favors white. And another problem with g6 is the bishop is trapped. g5, yes, the bishop trap, and it's also like kind of prove my point at the beginning that black pieces, it's really hard for black pieces to maneuver at the king side because of limited space. And look at the bishop stuck at h4 and like trapped here. So it's also because we have very less space than our opponent. So yeah, after losing the bishop, I don't think we should deep further of this game. I think white is clearly winning. I think this game is a really good example to showcase for how the pawn structure determines which side should we choose to attack or focus on. And because of the pawn structure, we have either greater or less space than our opponent, which means is it hard or easy for us to maneuver pieces? It's clear to see for black we have large space at the queen side, so we shouldn't like close the queen side um, if we don't have to. And also we should look at the knight g6 this move. So yeah, so if we think long term, if we decide to attack on queen side, I will move knight to c6 just to move our pieces to the direction where we want to attack our opponent. Okay, and also like after rook ca, yes. So these two moves, rook c and c4, these two moves are not consistent. And I have stated my reasons earlier. Okay, so that's the analysis. Thank you for watching.